this. Okay, so today's topic, just a little bit tranquil music in the background. I hope it doesn't interfere too much. What is borderline personality disorder? Now, if we're going to teach and we're going to educate, so you become relatable, so you understand someone's grieving process, so you understand someone's emotions. How can you rescue someone if you don't understand what it is that they're actually going through? Who am I? I'm Kerry Mussington. Let me remind myself of that. I'm Kerry Mussington, founder and director of Mind Over Matter Suicide Prevention. Here to educate around people's disabilities and disorders. So, I was given this booklet, and as long as I got a booklet, this book of instructions about, this represents somebody's life, and as it represents someone's life, they give you a pamphlet. What is borderline personality disorder? Well, BPD is another name for it. It's known as BPD. It's one of many personality disorders listed in the manuals used by doctors. Did you hear that? In the manuals used by doctors when they're giving someone a psychiatric diagnosis. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that are injured, dealing with trauma, but they don't necessarily visit the doctor. So if they don't visit the doctor, then the doctor won't, they're not asking for secondary mental health care or any mental health intervention. Therefore, they're very lucky they got away with not getting a label. But it doesn't mean they didn't experience or gone through the things that you've gone through. And in order to experience the things that you've gone through and what is relatable to previous history and previous research on individuals, gathering data, it's not until that research is done where you start to understand where perhaps maybe this pattern begins with. So people can't understand when they go to the mental health services or speak to people. It's not relatable. It's not always relatable what someone's going through. And so therefore, a lot of people are carrying a lot of burdens and a lot of baggage. And then on top of that baggage, they're dealing with COVID. All right, so I was watching earlier a video of a young lady talking about her experience during lockdown and borderline personality disorder of her emotions. Her emotions go up and down. Good evening, love. Her emotions go up and down throughout the days of borderline personality disorder. Now, let's relate that to emotionally unstable personality disorder, which was and is my label. And I always say, don't let labels define who you are and your ability, because they will stop you from achieving. This is something I found out the hard way. I was given a label because I took myself to the doctors, because I couldn't understand what I was going through, why I was feeling depressed. Now, I got that label, which represented trauma. So when they do a history of your background, it's looking into maybe perhaps your parents' background, how you were raised, how you were brought up, what you witnessed, and then you're giving a diagnosis. Now, I could have had many of diagnoses. Now, based on my diagnosis, EUPD, emotionally unstable personality disorder, sounds very scary, doesn't it? Don't run away. Just because I use those words, emotionally unstable, does that actually mean that I'm unstable? Does it? What a horrible word to have on my head. What a label to have on my head. Please share this post so it goes out to somebody else as well, please. Because there are hundreds and thousands of people with these diagnoses all over the world, and they are unrecognised, and they're in your face. They're in your living room. They're your friends. They're your family, and yet you don't know about their diagnoses. How it came across, how it came about, what it means, what it entails. So, these labels that are given to us represent trauma. No different to another label that I could add on top of the labels that I've got and the top of the labels that other people have got would be P, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now that label can happen to anyone. Depends what they witnessed. Depends how they handle their emotions, and depends whether or not they're dealing with flashbacks. Flashbacks. I have had so many flashbacks today, all because I was reading a book, and the book resembled a bit of my life. And I'm lucky to interview the author of that book tomorrow, called Consequences. Now, the consequences of not listening to this message is that, and sharing this message, is that what is going on in people's living rooms and their bedrooms and their homes right now is sheer pain, sheer stress, sheer anxiety, and no one understands them. Now, borderline personality disorder, these emotions very much resembles pretty much quite a lot of other disorders, but in reality they represent a human being that has been through the same trauma and experienced the same emotion and just doesn't have a diagnosis over their head, but still deals with emotions in an unhealthy manner. So what is borderline personality disorder? Okay, you have emotions that are up and down. For example, feeling confident one day and feeling despair another. With feelings of emptiness and often anger. You find it difficult to make and maintain relationships. And that one's a good one. Because how many times do people fall out with people and can't maintain relationships? How many times are people sitting in the room saying, I've got no friends, I feel isolated, and here comes the pattern of depression. It's right there. It's not helpful. It's because people are misunderstood. They don't understand. People that don't have a label don't understand the need to support people with a label. They don't get it. And so there comes the abandonment and the rejection, and the cycle continues again. The despair, up and down like a yo-yo. Until, I'm going to tell you that at the end of the day, it's not going to be the end of the world here, all right? You have unstable sense of identity. Never knowing who you are, what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to act, who you're supposed to please, what you even do with your body, because you've been taught so many different ways of different love languages from one another. People have taught you different love languages. They've said, don't do this, do this. If you don't do this, there's a consequence to every piece of love language that you've learned from one human being to another. There's been a consequence, creating the trauma. Never knowing where to go, never knowing who to talk to because there's consequences. Consequences. So, you have an unstable sense of identity, such as thinking differently about yourself depending on who you are with. Did you hear that? Depending on who you are with. Now that's right. Because that's the same with anyone that doesn't have a label. And this is how I'm going to distinguish it and remove stigma. That is the same with anyone that doesn't have a label, all right? That label depending on who you're with, well, are they positive role models? Are you enjoying their company? Are they negative influence? Because if they're negative influence and they are bad-mouthed, bad-minded, talking behind people's back every 5 minutes, and they've got no value there, and they're hanging out with you, smoking drugs, doing weed, having alcohol, nothing life but a party, where's the direction? So it does depend who you're hanging around with. If you have a good influence and you have a good role model, you wouldn't be in half the situations that you find yourself in. After all, that's where it's come from in the first place, isn't it? Who you've been around. What did you learn? What did the eye see and what did you learn? What habits did you pick up? Wow. Okay. You take risks or you do things without thinking about the consequences. Yes. Impulsive decisions. Being very impulsive. Not learning how to manage the anger. So rather than count to 10, breathe, find a distraction, there's the impulsiveness, and perhaps people have smashed things up. Perhaps they've taken it out on themselves because the panic is overwhelming. When they fear they're losing something, when they fear that something may be their fault, when they fear something doesn't go right, they take it out on themselves. You harm yourself or you think of harming yourself. For examples. And do you know what? I'm going to address this book here. This book here, let me just point out something about this book here. You are what you read, you are what you see, you do what you read and see. You're influenced by material that you read. So this book here, I'm going to have a board meeting with mind. Mind. This is why I'm mind over matter. This is not an insult, this is an observation. This is an observation because it's in my hands. And the observation I am zero tolerance to promoting methods in how somebody hurts themselves. And in this booklet, suggest 2 ways of harming yourself. Now, for a vulnerable person that is given a leaflet and needs to understand what they're going through, may have never experienced those 2 emotions that I have identified in this book. They may never have experienced these emotions. And yet there is 2 identical patterns in here that promote a method. How are we going to break the cycle if we keep seeing it? It's no different to having a newspaper magazine and the title of how somebody killed themselves, how they ended their life. That doesn't need to be put in there. So, you think of harming yourself. It says you harm yourself or you think of harming yourself. Think about harming yourself. For example, and they've given those 2 examples. Harming yourself would have been plenty ample enough word. That's it. So this needs addressing. And I have to say that I am really against methods being promoted. If you've been diagnosed with, here's another one, you sometimes believe in things that are not real or true, called delusions, or you see or hear things that are not really there, called hallucinations. Okay, there's another one. You fear of being abandoned or rejected or being alone. Doesn't that equate to a lot of people? Fear of being abandoned, don't want their partners to walk out on them, don't want to lose their loved ones, don't want to lose their mum, don't want to lose their dad. Isn't that for everyone that didn't attend a GP? Fear of being rejected. Nobody likes rejection. Can you tell me who does? Is there a person that likes rejection? Okay. Or fear of being alone. Some people like being alone and some people don't. And some people don't want to be alone because they're looking for some future. And therefore they don't want to be alone. They don't choose to be alone. And therefore they go from boyfriend to boyfriend or girlfriend to girlfriend or whoever they choose to be. And never being able to hold down a relationship entirely because the love languages are completely different. There's a different story. For starters, when you're getting in relationships with or friendships with individuals, there's a different upbringing. There's a different story. For instance, some were brought up in a house where they had the whole full family around. And in some instances, some people were brought up in a care home. Now that's another story that I'm going to come back with. And I'm going to put on one big event. If you have been in a care home, I want to know. I want to hear your story, if you're willing to tell your story in aid of suicide prevention so people can understand and perhaps protect their children a little bit more from getting these labels, from getting these diagnoses. because this doesn't just come from home. This comes from care homes too, children's homes, should I say, because I was going through, like I said, reading that book, Consequences. It was just so like, wow. So these labels, they don't just come from your home. They do come from a pattern of events, people that you've interacted with who've been mean and cruel, and things you've seen and that are traumatic, but they may have come from what you've seen in a children's home. So where did that stem from? And then going into the children's home, and then the things that happened in the children's home. So these are where these labels can possibly come from. These diagnoses can possibly come from, because there is a story behind every child's voice. The hallucinations and delusions, I guess you've got to be at extreme crisis to reach those points of hallucinations and delusions. So whatever someone's going through, for them to reach that state of panic, to go through all of that, they are fearful, and fearful of the world, fearful of something. The unknown, what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen in the next few hours. They develop OCD, trying to control the environment around them. It says here, if you've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, you may be more likely to experience other mental health related problems, such as depression. Or the depression comes first before the fall, right? You have the depression, you're feeling unwell, you go to the doctor, blah, 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 blah. You start to have the crisis, you start to experience that this problem's not resolved, this is not happening, I don't know how to control it, it's getting out of hand, what do I do? How do I feel? What do I do to make myself feel better? And the state of panic comes in again. So before you know it, somebody's under the mental health unit because their emotions have got the better of them. And sometimes people have to be sectioned to keep safe, because they want the choice to keep safe, not because they're taken, because they chose to keep safe. They're not necessarily always taken, unless that's a real deep crisis where there's a sense of danger. That's because of the trauma that they experienced. Yeah. No child should have to experience trauma the way some of these children that are now adults have, or some of the children to this day are going through. Okay. It says, if you've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, you're more likely to be experience other mental health related problems, such as depression, anxiety, that's fear, eating disorders, or substance misuse, misusing drugs or alcohol. Very true. These are all the things that happened to myself. I experienced an eating disorder, substance misuse, abuse, alcohol, and yet I don't have the same. You might say, well, what's the difference between the borderline and the BP? Nothing, it's just another label. Just another label. But they both represent the same emotional distress when times are difficult. It says the question of personality disorders is controversial. What some experts term as personality are regards as the self. So any suggestion that a person's self is disordered, damaged or flawed can be distressing. What matters is that you get the help you feel you need. If after reading this booklet you feel that you may have BPD, you may want to talk to someone who is medically qualified. Be very wary of making self-diagnosis. Did you hear that? It's what it says. Be very wary of making self-diagnoses. That's right. Because you don't really want that label on you, to be honest. Because I'm telling you now, we know that trauma happens. Yeah, you want to identify what it is. Well, what it is the trauma. But what you're saying is what's happening to me. I want to know what's happening to me. So this is what they're diagnosing. They're putting it in a package of all the problems that you've had, all the habits that you're having related to that trauma. And then this is where the diagnoses come from. This is where the studying comes from and the research comes from into diagnoses. Suddenly you'll find that there's a whole nation full of people with BPD and EUPD and borderline personality, bipolar and schizophrenia and wow, the labels. ADHD, that's another one. That's another one I can actually give you experience on, ADHD. You never talk about ADHD and I don't think if we were educated on it, we wouldn't have been so quick to go down that route of the ADHD, unearthing what it really is, when I don't think they really know what it is. Just the same as they don't understand a BPD or EUPD or any of those others. What it is trauma. And I think when they diagnose these children so early with ADHD, let's look back into the household. I think my child was diagnosed with that at the end of the day because my household was unsettling. Perhaps it was a cry for help instead. And he ended up with a label, like I ended up with a label. Perhaps mine was a cry for help, but I ended up with a label. I ended up with a booklet and I ended up with a label, but I didn't end up with the help when I needed the help, when I was going through the trauma, when I was going through the injustices, when I was being bullied and picked on. The help wasn't there, but the label was. And this is the thing, isn't it? People end up with labels all too frequently that represent trauma. And isn't it funny how that the perpetrators do not get a label other than perpetrator, criminal, crook? You can name them all you want to, these perpetrators, but they don't walk away with this label, do they? They don't walk away with the label flawed to diagnose them. Who diagnosed the ones? If you had to diagnose these people, these perpetrators that did things to you, surely they would have a diagnosis. What diagnosis would it be? What would it be when they injure people? What would it be? Because they find it. I always find that, especially men in domestic violence, men that have created domestic violence, I find that they have these problems. Emotions are up and down. Feeling confident one day and then feeling despair another. Feeling often emptiness. Never enough, is it? They've got to hang around with their buddies and have a drink and stuff like that. I'm not saying all, some. This can be affect on women as well, all right, by the way. You find it difficult to make and maintain relationships. Well, isn't that anybody without a diagnosis? They don't need a diagnosis. Now, if you look at a person with that's created, that's done damage to a victim and they're the perpetrator, and say let's use domestic violence, let's just look at it. They find it difficult to make and maintain relationships. But yet they don't have a diagnosis over their head, do they? You have an unstable sense of identity, such as thinking differently about yourself depending on who you're with. Jack the lad then, innit? 1 minute they're different at home, when they're with their lads they're a different person. That's right. I always say when a group of men get together, it's a whole different atmosphere. And it is kind of like nature, watching nature. When a pack comes together, it's validation amongst men. That's what I saw, you know. So it's kind of nice seeing how people relate when they're around other people. Especially when you know your partner's got the problem. And then you see the normal people around you. But you know, behind closed doors, you don't know what people are going through and what they really are like, you know. So another thing. So you have, you risk or do things without thinking about the consequences. Yeah? Anyone that's a cheater risk and did things without thinking about the consequences. Didn't get labelled for them, though, did they? Think about it. I think anybody that gets cheated on or risks, do things like gambling away the household profit, that's a risk. Seeing somebody outside of the house, you know, maybe cheating or something, that's a risk. You know, come on, we can all do the risks, can't we? There's a lot of risk. You know, oh, baby, yeah, I gambled up our mortgage money. We're going to be homeless tomorrow. That's a risk. Doing things without thinking about somebody else, you know, that's a risk without the consequences. Perhaps at the end of the day, you say, some people are very impulsive. They will go do things without the consequences and don't worry about the consequences. And that's probably when they've got to the end of the devil and said, sod it, I don't care. And that's the point where there is consequences, you know. You harm yourself, or you're thinking about harming yourself. Well, okay, maybe there are people out there that don't harm themselves, but there are people out there that harm others. But they didn't get a label. The only label that is considered on them is a bully, right? Those that harm others is a bully. So who has the mental health here? Bullies or those with the labels? The victims. Most victims have labels. So if you ask your friends, have you got a diagnosis? And it turns out to be any of these, pretty much you'll know their story. Because that's what I find. I find there's a lot of these people out here that have these labels and that resonates with children of abuse. Not everyone, but the majority. And you look at the pattern, and then you look at the history, and you look where the education was not there. And that's why we end up as adults suffering longer than we should, because the education is not there. And the education really is self-respect, self-discipline, be careful, be wise, know who you're mixing with, all those things you were taught, or you can see people teaching correctly, those that teach correctly about the do's and the don'ts to watch out for things. Depends how you're brought up, doesn't it? Or dragged up. It depends. It depends what you've gone through, you know. What makes me laugh, it says if you've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, you may be more likely to experience other mental health related problems such as depression. Well, the depression is pretty much trying to keep it at bay, keep it away by implementing good things to do, structure, a vision. It's trying to keep the depression away. There is a lot of people that says, I've never experienced depression. Well, what would you do then? Let me say those that don't have a label. What would you do if you suddenly suffered a stroke and you lost the ability to walk, talk? Now, I know you can imagine it. You can picture it. You lost the use of one side of your body. I know you can picture it, but you just don't want to imagine it. Oh, it won't happen to me. What would you do when you have to retry and train yourself again to grow and to walk and talk again? You're going to tell me you can be happy through that. Okay, that's one scenario. What would you do if you lose a loved one? You've never experienced losing a loved one before, so you don't know how grief is going to affect you. You could have depression. What would you do, you know? What would you do if something happens untowards, but you didn't expect it? You see, that's the thing. You don't expect it. So when something happens and a change occurs, it can imbalance someone. If you had a car and you got a parking ticket and you didn't have any money in the bank and they were threatening with this, that and the other, you'd be like, oh my, what would happen? Would you go around trying to find the money to clear the debt? What if you couldn't find, well, you didn't have any loved ones, you didn't have any money around to do the debt? What are you going to do next? Take a loan to pay the debt? Yeah, you see, that's what happened as well to ordinary people that did not have a diagnosis, that did not suffer from depression, end up having depression because of circumstances. Now, there was an individual and a program, and you can look it up yourself. You'll find it on YouTube too. Killed by my debt. One little debt, one little bill, spiraled out of control, caused the man depression, didn't know where to go for help, didn't know what to do, didn't want to tell anyone what was going on, and took his own life. Left his family behind. It doesn't take a book to understand that you are no different to those people that have labels. Some people are sensitive because they've gone through things that you would never imagine, and you probably, what would you do if it happened to you? I'll say it bluntly out here. I'll say it very bluntly out here. I raise awareness to protect the children of our future, because when many of us that wear these labels have diagnoses, the parents were absent from vision in their own minds, and this is what's going on sometimes. People are in their own minds. But to protect the children of the future, I will continue to raise awareness so people understand that it doesn't take a label. There isn't them in us. It becomes both perpetrators and victims. But somebody who's never been a perpetrator and somebody who's never been a victim, wow, there's a big difference there, isn't it? They're probably happy. Who knows? Personality disorder. How common is a personality disorder? BPD is thought to affect less than 1% of those general population. It is estimated that 3/4 of those given the diagnosis are women. Did you hear that? Women. Women that have been raped and abused, exploited, and even experienced domestic violence. What if I disagree with the diagnosis that you've been given? Well, some people feel that they're only given this diagnosis because they do not fit in. They do not fit easily into other categories. If you feel that the GP or psychiatrist has misunderstood you, you're entitled to ask for a second opinion. Although this doesn't necessarily mean that your request will be granted. If you're having a problem getting the help you need, you may find an advocate, someone who can speak up for you and support you. For information about advocates, contact the information line. Well, okay. Well, an advocate. You see, this is why mind over matter matters, because I understand that when your communication is not very good because of a problem that you've got going on, doesn't mean you have to have a diagnosis on top to resolve the problem. So yes, it does take an advocate, somebody to find a solution. So it's all about solutions. All about solutions. But you see, you can't have it overturned. What are the common feelings and experience of people with BPD? If you have BPD, you may have a series of unstable and intense relationships or felt the need to cling too long to damaging relationships. Because we learned not to say no. We didn't know how to say no. There's a lot of people still out there going through the mill, not knowing how to stand up to their partners and say no. Or stand up to their families and say, no, I just don't want to. No, I just don't want to. Because the guilt sets in and then they go and do it anyway, pacifying the situation because they're worried about the consequences or letting them down the end paths. That's what it is. Doesn't matter if you speak the truth, doesn't matter if you have the right to say no. You still worry and feel guilty about letting someone down because you're a natural helper. So if you're clinging to a damaged relationship that works for the same person who is also clinging into the same relationship, so therefore at the end of the day, relationship problems are relationship problems. Is how you communicate and whether the love language is right or not. Whether or not you can get to really physically talk about those emotions that you're going through. And that's what makes a difference in any relationship. Whether or not you can really seriously have a conversation about emotions. No matter how hard it is, whatever you need to say, you should be able to say it freely without repercussions or fearing that person that you want to tell. And that's the problem. If anybody is fearing to tell you and say, well, I wanted to tell you, but ask yourself if you are approachable. Are you approachable? Why should somebody fear you? What have you done to make them fear you? So it's a two-way street when it comes to communication. Are you approachable? You may have poor self-image. You may feel insecure, alone, or lack self-worth, the self-esteem. That's what we work on at the Mum Project. You may feel that you don't fit in or belong and find that your moods and feelings change rapidly. Therefore, you might find social relationships difficult. That is very true, and I don't think you have to have a label for that as well. I think, yeah, there's trauma, but if you did, like I said, if you didn't visit the doctor, maybe you didn't get that label. But it doesn't mean you're not experiencing what any of these people with relationship problems experience, because rejection and abandonment and people are just not, they don't stay. They take and they go. But what's that lesson out of that for you? Is that a lesson for you, or is that a lesson for them? Is it a reflection on you, or is it a reflection on them? But what is your aim and where are you going? Because all too often we are looking for, we were groomed that way at school to pair up. We were groomed at school. Get in twos, get in groups. And you stand on the sideline waiting, especially if you're in a netball match or football or whatever, to where they picked teams. And when they picked teams, see, it all started at school, didn't it, love? Yeah? That's at home and school. When they started choosing teams at school, there were some people that didn't want to be picked, didn't get picked because of the way they looked, the way they smelled, the way their hair was. It wasn't because they were good or not. People had an image and shone away from people that didn't look like them or didn't relate, weren't cool, didn't hang out, didn't have the latest gear. And so it did start at school, where you had to pick who you were going to hang out with, who you were going to be friends with. Could you make friends at school? And that process has gone on throughout adulthood. Who can stay around and stay? Because people are damaging people too much. The friend that you once had, maybe they've done something silly you didn't expect, and now you've lost them because their attitude has changed. Why did it change? Because in the midstly, where you haven't seen them for a long time, they've gone for the mill. They've been up against different personalities and different people. They've gone through different things. So when you meet up with people again, they're not going to be the same. They're not going to be tolerable. Or they're going to cower down. Going to be quite the opposite and submissive. Want to please you all the while. People please, people please, people please. Why? Because they're so desperate to have friends. They're so desperate to have company. Because they were taught that way. So when we don't have company, we have to learn self-respect, self-image, self-development with ourselves. Because people will come and go, but we can't keep doing the destruction where we take it out on ourselves. The lessons out of it is, who wants to be with somebody that isn't stable, that doesn't laugh, that doesn't share enjoyment? But the problem is these people are not given a chance because they're willing to share enjoyment. They're willing to laugh. They're willing to. But they're so scared that perhaps you'll be just like everybody else. It isn't a 1 minute thing, or one person did this, or the one person done that. You'll find that it'd be many, many, many of characters that have injured or added to a victim not wanting to get close to other people. So tell me, if you've got given that label BPD or EUPD, and you ain't been abused, or you haven't been beaten, if you didn't have child abuse, where did you get the label from? And why did they label you that? If it's just about the emotions. I used to lie when I used to go to see the people at the doctors. Do you drink? Yeah. How often do you drink? Just one bottle, maybe once a weekend. Well, that was a lie. I was scared of the mental health services. I was scared of the image they say that taking you away in the white coats, which isn't necessarily true. The last thing they want to do is babysit people with mental health. It's a hell of a handful. No, they'd rather you be self-sufficient and learn how to grow and find the tools to good health and well-being and structure your life where you are. You're going to grow into that healthy man or healthy woman, because this is not just for women. This is men as well that end up with these labels. And sometimes they don't just end up with one label, they end up with more than one, because that's how many times they keep going back to the mental health unit, to the mental health ward. It's not the doctor. The doctor cannot diagnose an individual. The doctor cannot diagnose an individual. So you might have known, you see, this is the part about it. You might have had a family doctor for years. But suddenly your family doctor is saying, do you need to see a mental health worker? Yeah, I do. Because he's worried about whether or not you're going to be stable. So that's why. He just practices on you. But these people are supposed to, I suppose they practice too, but these people are supposed to have done a lot of research on it. And the doctor, if it's a family doctor, you would think that the amount of times you go, you explain things. I think, again, do we tell the doctors the whole story? Because if I were going to the doctor and said, doctor, this is why I'm depressed. My husband's beating me. He's cheating on me. He threatens me. He's done all of this. You know what the doctor's going to do, don't you? He's going to have a duty of care to safeguard you. And so then you stop going to the doctors. So we only tell people so much because we're trying to protect someone. Even the perpetrators, it's not that we want to protect them, we just know there'll be consequences. And so therefore, some of these victims are walking around and never having justice, never getting justice for the things that have happened to them. Never. What does justice look like? I say. Can you put a value on it when you're given compensation? Is that justice for you? Is it? Seeing a perpetrator on the stand and then being incarcerated, getting so many years, but knowing they're going to be let out. Is that justice for you? And you having never gotten your life back and still crying and still doing the same rhetoric. Is that justice? That's not justice. They're winning. Perpetrators win when you start going into a pit of depression and your life is thrown. They set out to destroy your life in the first place, right? But even if they're incarcerated or no longer here, they're not in control of you anymore. You are. And they're not even in your house. They might be in your head. But sometimes we have to clear out that closet and replace all of those unhealthy things that have ever happened to us and have a different focus. I got better because I stopped focusing on the perpetrators. I stopped looking for revenge. I stopped carrying away carrying inside that anger. Every now and again I'm reared up. Every now and again I'm literally reared up. When I hear a story, see a story, I'm angry. When I speak to a parent and I tell the parent, look at what you're doing to your child, and the parent doesn't do anything, I think you're just killing that child. And then the parent says, oh, I'm better off not being here. This is what this book represents. All the people that didn't want to bloody be here at one point, struggle with those emotions. Some struggle with those emotions. They get so desperate they go to the doctors. But they don't see their children. If you are going to the doctors to discover what's wrong with you and you've got a household full of children as well, perhaps you should seek to see if they need some care and some support as well. Because after all, they're witnessing this, that and the other. Do you think it's good to take your life? No. After all of the crappy stuff that I've done, when I look now and I'm doing what I'm doing, helping the community understand mental health a bit more, my gosh, no one should have ever taken their life because of perpetrators, because of people that are not willing to listen or understand or put things right. No one should have never taken their life. So yeah, these labels that they put on us, yeah, I don't think we deserve those labels like that. Carry those labels for the rest of our life when that represents those kind of traumas. Unfair, isn't it? It's a little bit unfair, isn't it? But if we decide to tell anyone, and this is what we do, we don't tell people about the labels because it does come irrelevant after a while if you can get through it. Because is it important to tell people that you have a diagnosis? Is it? Or do you become that diagnosis because you keep telling people that you have a diagnosis? It isn't the diagnosis that's causing the immediate problem, though, is it? If you're going off the rails or you're feeling emotionally disturbed, it wouldn't be the diagnosis that's doing it, would it? It wouldn't be, it's because of my label I'm feeling this way. No. Look at the excuse that you're making for the problem that is in front of you. Maybe alcohol. Maybe a broken relationship. Maybe you're being abused. Maybe you're being disrespected. Maybe you're being cheated on. These are true things that are happening. It isn't the label. It's an emotion that you're experiencing on things that are uncomfortable for you. And if that is what is going on in your home or in your life today and things are uncomfortable, then only you can change it. And that will take a plan. And yes, talk to someone. Talk to somebody that's been there, knows it, or talk to a therapist. I understand that you'll be reluctant, but you have to talk to someone to change it. People often think that they're never going to change. How are they going to get out of it? Well, you get out of these things by showing up for something that you are committed to do. And a lot of the people, when I speak to these people and they're in crisis and they're depressed and they're drinking or they're not drinking, it's the same rhetoric. They've got nothing to do. They don't have a focus on themselves to a vision because they feel hopeless. Because they've been beat down so many times, are being told they're useless, worthless. Been mocked, ridiculed, bullied, online cyberbullying, all of that over again. So it didn't just stem from the one incident when they were younger or wherever it is. It's a multiple of incidents where they start to distrust humanity. Now, that doesn't take a label to do that though, does it? Because people that don't have labels, male or female that don't have a label, and they encounter bad experiences or bad relationships, will still take the same stance as somebody with a label. Barriers are barriers. Some people let people in, some people don't. Some people just accept anybody in their life because they want comfort, and that anybody that they keep accepting in their life can just destroy their life. just as quick as they started to build it. So you'll find that the circle and the pattern goes like that, like a roller coaster, up and down, with diagnoses, disorders, disabilities. It's the same rhetoric, isn't it? Unless you can change it and find something good, some good to change. I had to change all of what was happening to me. Nobody explained it to me. They gave me a label, never explained anything, but I had to piece it together as an adult. I had to piece it all together. Oh my God, I've got a label because it represents this. What did the perpetrators get? Did they become homeless? Nope. You'll find victims of crime end up losing their houses. Yeah, it's a very frequent situation. And the perpetrators get to stay in their warm, comfortable beds. You'll find victims having to relocate and the perpetrators staying in the same place. You will find victims struggle and the perpetrators go on to create more victims because they can't address their own behaviour. So these labels, they came from, some of these labels came from because of perpetrators. That should have had a label themselves. Then we would have been warned, wouldn't we? So behaviour is behaviour and it can change. You can get better. You can manage your health. I understand that, you know, mental health is not spoken about too much within the Black community, and that, you know, that needs to be spoken about more. It's not spoken about a lot within the white community either, or any community, if I'm honest. It's not about, I don't know why I always do that, probably because I was in a black and white setting for majority of my life. So forgive me, not meaning to offend anyone. So let's just say worldwide, then things can get better. And mental ill health happens when there are situations that are uncomfortable for an individual. Mental health means your mind in your mind, and it's about your health, but it won't define what someone's going through. So it needs breaking down. When you say to someone, when someone says to you, when you say, "You're right," they go, yeah, I've got mental health. All right then, love. You don't indulge any more than that, do you? How can I help you? What can I do to make you feel better? What is it I can do? What is this? Do you actually ask what it details, what it means? What does it mean for them? I think when people are explaining what it means for them, is they do like to try and use it as a, well, once I did this. Because when they're talking to you, it's very scary talking to you, because they don't want you to think that they're doing it now, because they feel that you're going to judge them now. So they might say, well, yeah, I had an episode, or once was this, but in actual fact, they struggle with emotions. Do I struggle with my emotions? I said to someone today, with all the trauma that I have endured and everything that I've ever gone through, and I was quite tearful when I was projecting this because of the because of what I was reading, and I said to him today, I think everybody has a potential to do something really, something they will regret for the rest of their life when it comes to anger management and holding your temper and knowing what to do with your temper. And I think when you have got these people out there that have been abused, traumatic, the whole things that they've gone through, I think it takes a warrior, really, and I'm going to use that word, to just be beaten down like that over and over and over again and not lash back. And I think that's the difference, isn't it, for the perpetrators? They couldn't maintain their anger. They couldn't maintain their fetish or whatever it was that created the victim to feel worthless. So these labels that... This is a couple of people that talk about their experiences with BPD. I have BPD, and for me it feels like I'm a child being forced to live in an adult world. I feel too fragile and vulnerable for the world I live in. What I took from those first few lines feels like I'm a child being forced to live in an adult world. What I took from those lines was that inner child has never been able to grow because it's been damaged when it was younger. So that innocent, a child's innocence has been stolen. So you'll find that victims are trying to search for that inner child throughout their adult life to find that what they missed, the enjoyment, the free from harm, and that's been missing. That's the stolen childhood. Many people with BPD experience a deep sense of emptiness. That was the reply back. Feeling bereaved and lifeless with a void. I can't feel no matter how much food I put down or activity, exercise, self-harm or constant thinking I've gone through. I try to keep busy, combat the emptiness, but it's only a mask. The best antidote is to try experience life and relationships more fully and store the better memories. I love that one because it is about, this is what the Mom Project do. We replace the old with a new way. And that is to keep motivated, keep structured, and show up. Showing up, I always say show up for therapy, showing up for yourself. It's showing up for you. That's therapy. When it was really bad, I would be in so much emotional pain that suicide seemed like the only way I could find any release. My attempts at suicide kept failing. I just had to remove the method from my conversation. I was secretly screaming for someone to just listen to me and show me a way out. But in the end, if they wouldn't or couldn't be bothered to help me, I would rather have been dead than carry on, as I just didn't care about anything apart from getting rid of the pain. Tells me the person was isolated, wasn't understood, doesn't have any friends to talk things through with that gets them to carry her through or him through to the next stage of the journey. It says research shows that people with BPD are more likely to have suicidal thoughts and make suicidal attempts compared to people with other psychiatric diagnoses. If this applies to you or someone close to you, you can find information about where to get help in the section, How Can I Get Help in Emergency? What causes BPD? The causes of BPD are unclear. The most researchers think that BPD develops through a combination of factors, including temperament, childhood, and adolescence experiences. Difficult life events such as early loss of parent, childhood neglect, sexual or physical abuse are common in people diagnosed with BPD, though this is not always the case. Stressful experiences such as a breakup of relationships or the loss of a job can lead to already present symptoms of BPD getting worse. That means that the baggage that you had here may not have been dealt with, then they have more baggage on top, then more baggage on top, then more baggage on top. And every time they try to get to a destination of something good, something else happens. And then you'll hear someone, every time I try to do something, something bad happens. I will tell you that that word in itself, what you just said, is negative. It's called law of attraction. Look at that law of attraction, because when you say these things happen and continue to happen. You stop the process of anything good happening to you. So your words are very powerful, what you throw out into the universe. Don't believe me? Hey, I'm here today because of the words of changing my words. I am much better mentally because I change my words. Doesn't mean I don't experience wobbly. What I don't experience, which is a different chapter now, different change and a growth, because I've been able to, I think, helping other people gave me the tools to talk back to myself. It was like a reflection back at myself. Come on, do this and do that and you can change it. You can be in control. It doesn't have to be in control of you, but you do have to control your surroundings. So in comes the barriers, and even I put barriers up. I take no prisoners anymore. In a nice mannerism, I'm not tolerating anyone's BS. Because why I don't tolerate it, and I'll say it from the get-go. This is me. You'll get nothing else from me but abrupt talking in a mannerism. This is me. That's my lingo. Learn my language. Learn my culture. I speak differently towards some other people, and it can be seen as, oh, she's aggressive, she's hostile. Listen, I get the job done. I'm not aggressive. I'm not hostile. It's my language. It's my language. Another thing as well, another symptom of individuals feeling stressed and suffering a lot, where they might swear. Now, I wrote that down in my care plan at one point, that swearing was one of the telltale signs that I was stressed out. I think that goes for a lot of people, but when people say, I mean, I've been arrested for swearing. That then became another traumatic event. We're going to arrest you because you swear. Well, you didn't understand the mental side of it, did you? The impact of what just happened to me. I'm swearing because I ain't hitting the cow, am I? I ain't hitting them. You see, people swear instead of lashing out. And when you do try and do the right thing, then that it teaches you another manner. Like I said, doing the right thing has cost me. Telling police officers that I've been struck by a female who's hit me over the head with a bottle rather than beating her ass. And I could have done that years ago. Like I said, rehabilitation. You have to rehabilitate your mind because the test is you. Holding that anger. And this is the thing. I was so angry that I was trying to do the right thing and I got arrested, and it was the most traumatic experience. I never wanted to speak to an officer again about any event that ever happened to me again. And so it did happen again. I was a victim, and I was a victim for 5 months. Lost everything, but without going into that story, because that wasn't that long ago. But without going into that story, that's the consequences of not fighting back. And this is how perpetrators get away with it, because victims, we know that if you unleash the beast, then we'll go the same way that you guys go, wouldn't it? We'd end up in prison, wouldn't we? We don't want to go to prison. We don't want to be in trouble. We don't want to do nothing. We just want a peaceful life and free from harm. So, it is containing the beast with anyone. We have to learn to manage that anger management within yourself. Because it's like a volcano. We bubble up and bubble up and bubble up. And if you don't talk it out, then some people will explode, and then they take it out of themselves. So really, I hope I tried to demonstrate that that these labels, it is really about relationships where you can be free from harm. So you don't need parents beating you. You don't need people beating you, picking on you, abusing your body, name-calling you, ridiculing you. You don't need any of those things. When those things occur, it leaves scar tissue and damage. And unfortunately, some people are more sensitive than others. And that's where the labels come from. How sensitive is one person? And I understand that people would be afraid to hear or sit next to somebody with a label and not understand it. And I hope I've broken it down, that we were unfortunate to have those labels, because it represents such trauma. But that doesn't mean that's where we're not now. We're not there now. You know, the healing process is a healing process. But hey, I've got a whole story to tell you how I overcome. You see, that's what you want to hear. How you overcome. How you got your life back. How you got your groove back. And didn't let the bastards beat you down. And yes, I have every right to call them what I want to, because they stole my childhood. And many other people's around there. So I won't pretend to be pleased about the system letting half of these people on the street for them to ruin our children's lives. So what I do is raise awareness, and so that you will spot the signs and that you can protect your children and the future children and yourself, and that you can be educated and you can help your friends and your family understand a little bit more. It's often too embarrassing to say to someone, hey, I have a label. Yes, I have a label. Well, what does that mean? Well, this is what it meant because of that then. But this is who I am. I'm a lovable woman. I love people. I do like to people please, by the way. I like to help where I can. I'm full of ideas. I get so creative. I just want to put those ideas on pen and paper and get them out there. Unfortunately, I don't always have the help. And you know what? I'm running a project with a label. And with the label that I have not let that stop me. That label... that label that I had was given, as you heard, that I read it out in the book, that once you've got a label, you can't take it away. So if you ask me a question, I've got to give you the truth, innit? Don't ask me the question, perhaps I won't tell you. But if you ask me the question, I will have to tell you. Yes, I had a label. And that's the part where then I feel embarrassed. And I shouldn't, right? But I'm human too. I don't begin to say that I'm over every emotion. I'm through every single emotion. I'm just saying I feel embarrassed when I tell people that I had mental health, or I had mental health, or I have mental health, because I quite frankly don't want to believe that I've got mental health. Then does that become denial? But I'm not in denial. I have a label that represents what I went through. I'm not there now. I've quite had a bit of peace for a little while, for quite a long time actually, for a little while now. And I've been able to focus on myself and focus on the project and move forward and raise awareness on different topics, using different people, coming together and pushing out this awareness live. Because no point in keeping all of this information in my head when people need to hear it. Your friends and your family around you have labels. Some have labels, but you don't even know. I will tell you something. Not a single one of my people that I know very close to me, or was past tense close to me, ever asked me about my label. Never asked me about the diagnosis. What does it mean? How can I help? Never sat down to discuss it. Now, I may ask you, have you ever done that with your family? Because you are responsible to getting that information out there too, just like I have done today, giving you awareness around borderline personality disorders. Let's just put that into category of BPD or EUPD as well. All right, it's the same remit. Okay, so have you explained to your colleagues, your friends? Do you raise awareness? Do you have that label? Do you raise awareness on it? Doesn't mean you have to project that it's about you, but maybe that might be your common interest about it. Do you raise awareness on it? Because nobody can soften up or bring the nice side. And sometimes some people have to change their behaviour in order to adapt. Maybe if they're not going to change their behaviour, maybe you will have to change your circle. I did. And because I've changed my circle, my road now is positive. But my circle before was negative. I have to say it was very negative. And so therefore, I didn't realise that I was in negative. I was just chilling, having a good time. But a good time bring fire. So this is me. Thanks for listening. I sat here and I wanted to bring awareness, and that's what I've done. So that's borderline personality disorder awareness that I have projected out this week. Tomorrow, I say tomorrow, you might, by the time you get this, you might have missed me live if you haven't clicked that follow and like button, and when I go live, you won't know. So when you get this, if you get this after the event, just go on to Mind Over Matter Suicide Prevention on YouTube, and you can catch up on any of the material that we've projected live. You'll get it on Facebook as well, won't you? But just in case you don't want to go into Facebook, the links for the YouTube channel will be there, and on several platforms that we raise awareness. But I'm with Peter Francis tomorrow, author and comedian of, we'll talk about his new book, Consequences. I look forward to that. Look at this. So I have 1, 2, 3 sheets, and I have got up to 70 points here so far, and that's through reading that book. This is a lot of my life too. So that book, go and get it on Amazon. That's where it would be. Peter Francis, Consequences. You'll find that on Amazon. Go and get it. So this is me raising awareness today. I'm Kerry Mussington. Thank you very much, the founder and director of Mind Over Matter Project. Mum's the word. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the education. Please raise the awareness. Don't make me waste my words. Please, because I'm not doing this for just myself. I do it for the other people. And when you used to say to people, I want to help people so they don't feel like me. Well, do it now. Share. Thank you.